I'm going to introduce our next speaker, but I was quite struck that as we got ready to sing the national anthem, he stood up and in a very dignified, quiet way, took the moment in. And this is something he's been doing really his entire life. He has really epitomized the idea of a life of service. He represented political prisoners throughout the 80s and the early 90s. Of course, many of us know him to be synonymous with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He's a founder of the South African National Association of Democratic Lawyers. He has served as president of the Black Lawyers Association. He's a member of the Judicial Services Commission, and he's also sat as a judge in various divisions of the High Court in South Africa. What you don't know is that he's finally been persuaded to write his life story. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the first speaker of the day, Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't know what I should come and say here until I went back to a letter or an email that I got in April in which Diane wrote to say, we would be honored if you would accept our invitation to speak about your leadership journey to inspire and encourage our audiences. And then I said, oh, that's easy. You know, I will, I've always long wanted to come and write a story about my life. But I don't know if the story is going to inspire or is going to encourage audiences. But let me try. My name is Ntsebeza. I'm Dumisa Ntsebeza. I'm an advocate. I practice. That's my day job. And I've been practicing that for the last, I don't know how many years. But where did it all begin? I think for me, it began in 1967, when I had a government scholarship, Transkei government at the time, to go and study at Fort Hare, University of Fort Hare. My father and I had discussed what I was going to go and study there. And my father had said, oh yeah, you know, there's something called a BA law. You know, it gives you an opportunity to be able to teach, because I said, I also want to teach because you are also a teacher. And also, it gives you an option, if you get tired of teaching, to switch to law and become a lawyer. What would you like to be? I said, yeah, I think the idea of a teacher is good, but I also think the idea of becoming a lawyer is not something that is, it's not something that I wouldn't like to do. So when I got to Fort Hare, instead of being told by those who were in management that they still give a BA law, they tell me, no, we have discontinued the BA law. We now do a B juris. And then I said, well, that's not what my father had said. You know, we didn't discuss about the B juris. No, it's the same thing. I said, no, it can't be the same thing. My father said, if I do a BA law, I have the opportunity to have non-law subjects and then go and teach and all of that. And in the end, I ended doing courses in arts, history, African languages, English, philosophy, and history. And what I would like to remark about this is that in that year, the tuition fee for a first-year student was 200 rands. And no, my government scholarship was 200 rands. And the entirety of what I had to pay was 187 rand. So there was 13 rand change, and I went to open a post office bank book so that I make use of what remained. But because this is the story of my life in 15 minutes, let me cut to the chase. because I want to say something about 1968. Because 1968 is the year when a Professor De Wet came in July 1968 to be the rector of the University of Fort Hare. And he got a very hot reception because he had made a speech before he came to Fort Hare that I'm going to Fort Hare to make sure that the policy of apartheid, of separate development, is carried to its logical conclusion. That university will eventually end up as a Xhosa-speaking university for Xhosa-speaking students. This didn't get really good favor with us because we felt that it was not in his province to prescribe which university must provide for which population group. But in '68, and I think inspired by all those movements internationally, Danny the Red and whatever, there were a lot of sit-ups, stand-downs, and sit-ins. So we also followed suit. And by June, August, cut a long story short, in October of that year, 7 of us felt sick and tired of the fact that we were not getting this rector to go back where he belonged, which is Potchefstroom. He had been at Potchefstroom. So we decided in what we called Operation Catwalk. And that Operation Catwalk, had 7 actors. Yours truly was one of them. We decided we were going to paint, under cover of darkness, the university walls with the biggest slogans that that university could think of. And I remember that I painted a slogan called, "Go away, go back, you Potchefstroom scum." And that we did. Within 3 weeks, the special branch had arrested us. There were 7 of us, kept in terms of Section 83, Section 6 of Act number 83 of 1967. That had the name, the Terrorism Act. In terms of that act, you could be kept incommunicado, without access to anybody, for an indefinite period of time, and no one was allowed and could see you other than the doctor. That is as and when they call the doctor or the police. Occasionally, there would be a magistrate who would come and see you. So that's the law in terms of which I was arrested and detained from Alice to East London. And there was a lot of third degree in the manner in which questions were asked of you. I'll just give you an example. A gentleman called Skippers, after I had had some rough time with a gentleman called Donald Card. You know Donald Card. You know, he and Donald Woods were buddies. But if you don't, then you must go and Google Donald Card and Donald Woods. But in any event, this gentleman had seen how we had had an altercation, a rough physical with Mr. Donald Card. And Mr. Donald Card went after he had promised me that, you know, he doesn't want to have this kind of interaction with me because he could kill me. Mr. Skipper said, you know what? We know already. We know everything about what you did. You know, that's what cops do. We know exactly where you did A, B, C, D, E, and F. And when I said to him, but then if you know everything, why are you asking me this? I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. Because he sprang out of that chair at which he was sitting as though he was not the big man that he was. And having been engaged in roughing me up, he felt that that was not enough. He then said, you know what? Your case, I understand today you don't use that word. Your case, you think that because you are at university, you're big stuff. But you know, Jaleble Altate man case. And that was in my face. And then I said, oh yeah, so this is what happens. Then I remembered that in terms of the law, nobody is going to have access to me. So, but I mean, the outcome of that detention was that we appeared for malicious damage to property. We were very fortunate because the original intended charge was sabotage, which would have fetched a period of 10 years. But we were quite fortunate because of the paucity of evidence, it was reduced to malicious damage to property. And then it was a lot of money, but we were fined 60 rand or 60 days. But that was the end of my academic career at the University of Fort Hare. But that was not only that. Professor De Wet, we were to learn, made sure that all 7 of us, including yours truly, were to be denied university education at any residential university in South Africa. And the only access to education of any sort at a tertiary level was going to be with long-distance study, which is why I then studied with UNISA. So I couldn't be admitted to any university, and I studied with UNISA, did a BA. Then I wanted to teach. Of course, you couldn't teach if you didn't have a teacher's certificate. And therefore, I had to go and teach without one. And if you didn't have a teacher's qualification, even with a BA, which I had in 1971, you were not well remunerated, even by those standards. I earned a princely sum of 660 rand per annum, fixed, which meant it was 55 rand a month, 54 rand and a few change with some, with tax. But I enjoyed teaching. Because one of the people I taught, I went and taught at a school called Jongilizwe College for Sons of Chiefs and Headmen. And some of the people I taught there ended up in the military, both in the Transkei Defence Force and in the South African National Defence Force. One of them was Bantu Olomisa, and there are a whole host of others. And during that period, when I was teaching, I decided I should study law because that's what I wanted to do. But the only place I could study law was the University of South Africa. And I was in the Bantu stand in a place called Tsolo. There were no library facilities, and we advised that if we wanted some library facility, we could go to the local magistrates court. And I went and met Mr. Dakatos there, who was the resident magistrate. And I said to him, look, it has been recommended that we must come and approach the local magistracy and see to what extent they can assist us with library facilities because I'm studying law. I've registered for introduction to law, private law, criminal law. And all the time I was talking, Mr. Dakatos was looking at me like that. And then he stood up and said, you see, I'm going to give you these books on one condition. Don't let any fat on them. Don't let kids play with them. Don't lose them. Don't tear them up. Don't. And then I said to him, oh yeah, thank you very much, sir. By the way, would you be related to Mr. Dakatos who ran a cafe in Kala, where I was born and bred? And he immediately changed. He said, did you know my father? I said, no, I used to work for him. You know, I used to go and, whenever they played golf, we used to go and be caddies. So I know Mr. Tragatos, so I'm very glad that you are his relative. From there on, I got books without being told that don't let fat on them. Don't. But this is a very sad, you know this story in 15 minutes. But let me say this. Whilst I was teaching at Jonglizwe, and I was teaching Holomis, I was teaching them law, what was called Bantu law, Bantu administration, English, history, and whilst I was there, I was involved in an underground structure. We had begun to form something called the People's United Front for the Liberation of South Africa. And we decided that we were going to be an underground structure. We were going to do this, and the next thing. We immersed ourselves in the study of Marxism, this, that, and the next thing. And then there is this one day in 1976, during lunch on a Friday, 11th of June, 1976, 3 men came into the dining room of where I was teaching. And that was just 3 months after the then Deputy Minister of Information, Lechrantse, very tall gentleman. Lechrantse had come to the school, this college of chiefs, for sons of chiefs and headmen, and had found me teaching my history lesson. And the subject on that day was the decolonization of Mozambique, Angola, and Cape Verde, and Guinea-Bissau. So, and that was part of the syllabus. And there I was teaching, and I was, it's March 1976. And in the media, there is talk of whether or not South Africa is in Angola or is not in Angola. So when he comes, and I'm teaching, he says, no, let me take over the class. And he should not have done that. I still remember General Matanzima now, who was one of the students there. He interrogated this minister. Are you involved in Angola? And if you are, why are you there? And there was this debate and what have you. And then thereafter, to cut a long story short, the principal, I, and Mr. Lechrantse went to our library to indicate to him what it is that these students are being taught. And there he was. He says, are you allowing to read them? Are you allowing them to read all of this? And Taliad was the principal, said, no, we encourage them to read everything, from the furthest left to the furthest right. Because he had seen the Sunday Times. And he was horrified that they were reading the Sunday Times, the Post, even though the Oorsterlig was there and a whole host of other newspapers. I was talking about the 11th of June, 1976. 3 gentlemen came in terms of Section 6 of Act number 83 of 1967, which is the Terrorism Act. We are taking you in because we want you to ask some questions. So this was the second time that I was taken in terms of the Terrorism Act. And the rest is history, because I was not as lucky as I was in 1967. This time around, we went through a court process. The Chief Justice presided. Let me say something about what the Chief Justice said. Mr. Chief Justice Munich. On the first day of our appearance, some of the 5 of us who were being charged did not have legal representation. And this is how he admonished us. He says, I will encourage I choose numbers 3, 4, and 5 to get legal representation, even if it is a pro deo legal representation, because it is critically important that they must also be represented. Because the nature of the charges, as I looked at them, I can see that the death sentence is competent, and therefore they need to have legal representation. So I realized that, yeah, things are getting to where I didn't think they are going to get. And that is where, after we had been convicted and sentenced on the 1st of September 1977, I went to jail. And that's where I completed my BProc, studying through the University of South Africa. I started my LLB there. And you know, very ironical about this is that I then went to practice, and Bongani has told you that I began to represent political prisoners. But the funny thing about this is that for the longest time, I just didn't get to register for an LLB. So one day I go to the prison in Mthatha to go and consult. My time is up, just 2 minutes, please. I get to Mthatha, I consult. As I was consulting, one of the prison warders, who had been my prison warder whilst I was there, and he had knowledge of my studies with the University of South Africa, he says, hey, you must have completed your LLB now. And then, you know, because, you know, I used to see how you were doing and fairly well here. And then I said, oh, yeah, I haven't actually found time. And then he said, you see, people always say people are being ill-treated in jail. You came here and you get a BProc and you started your LLB. Now you can't even finish it because you are there. So for him, you know, it was an advantage for me to be in prison. Now, the one thing that I would like to comment about is what happened this year. Because this year, a special meeting of the Council of the University of Fort Hare unanimously decided to appoint me as the Chancellor of the University of Fort Hare. So when I related this story, I was given a letter. The letter came from Donald Cart. And Donald Cart says, congratulations, Mr. Chancellor. When I look back to 1968, when you were in detention, and I never in my wildest dream could think that you, who had been involved in that group of 7, would now come back. So when I related the story to somebody, he said, hey, but man, it has taken you almost 50 years to get justice. And I said, oh, well, justice. You know, there's something they say about justice. They say the wheels of justice may be grinding slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Politicians of today, beware.